My name is General Mark Milley. For 40 years, I've served this great nation through some of its most challenging moments. From the battlefields of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan, from NATO command to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But nothing in my 4 decades of military service could have prepared me for what I witnessed during those dark days of January 22-1. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that will shake you to your core. A story about how a sitting president of the United States nearly triggered World War III. A story about betrayal, conspiracy, and the moment I had to choose between following orders and saving America. Donald Trump wanted to launch nuclear strikes against China, and I had to commit treason to stop him. This is my story. This is the truth. And this is why I may never sleep peacefully again. January 6, 2021, 7:30 a.m. I was sitting in my Pentagon office, still processing the horror of what had happened just 24 hours earlier. The Capitol had been breached. American democracy had been attacked from within. But the real storm was just beginning. When my secure phone rang, the caller ID showed a name that made my blood run cold. Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Her voice was shaking. Barely controlled panic bleeding through her usual composure. "General Milley," she said, "we need to talk about those nuclear codes. That man is unhinged, and he's going to get us all killed." In that moment, I felt something no general should ever feel. Genuine terror. Because Pelosi's fears matched exactly what had been keeping me awake for the past 48 hours. You see, Trump had been spiraling. The man who controlled the most powerful military arsenal in human history was coming apart at the seams, and I had a front row seat to his disintegration. 3 days earlier, January 3rd, he had called me into the Oval Office. What I witnessed there still haunts my nightmares. Trump was pacing behind the resolute desk like a caged animal, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with something I'd only seen in combat zones. The look of a man pushed beyond his breaking point. "The Chinese screwed us, General," he spat, slamming a classified intelligence folder onto his desk. "They interfered in our election. They humiliated America, and now they think they can get away with it." I picked up the folder. The intelligence inside was thin, circumstantial, unverified. But, to Trump, it was gospel truth. "Sir," I said carefully, "these reports are preliminary. We need more verification before verification." He wheeled around, his face flushed red. "I don't need verification. I need action. Those bastards need to learn that you don't mess with the United States of America." The way he said it, the venom in his voice, the pure hatred burning in his eyes. In 40 years of military service, I'd faced down terrorists, dictators, and enemy commanders. But I'd never been more afraid than I was sitting across from the President of the United States. "What kind of action are you considering, Mr. President?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. Trump walked to the window, staring out at the Washington skyline. When he turned back, there was something different in his expression, something cold, calculating. "I want options, General, real options, the kind that will make Beijing regret ever crossing Donald Trump." "What kind of options?" I pressed. "The nuclear kind." The words hit me like a physical blow. The President of the United States was talking about nuclear war like it was a business negotiation gone wrong. "Sir, any nuclear option would require extensive consultation with Congress, our allies." "Screw Congress," he exploded. "Screw our allies. I'm the President. I'm the Commander-in-Chief. When I say jump, you ask how high." That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept thinking about those nuclear codes, sitting in a briefcase just down the hall from a man who was clearly losing his grip on reality. The next morning brought the Capitol insurrection. As I watched those images on television, American citizens, storming the heart of our democracy, realized we were dealing with something unprecedented in American history. We weren't just facing a constitutional crisis. We were facing an existential threat to everything we stood for. and it was coming from inside the White House. After my conversation with Pelosi, I made the most difficult decision of my career. I called an emergency meeting of the Nuclear Command Authority. Defense Secretary Christopher Miller, CIA Director, NSA representatives, everyone who had a hand in America's nuclear arsenal. Gentlemen, I said, looking each man in the eye, effective immediately, no nuclear launch order will be executed without my direct approval. None. A young colonel shifted uncomfortably. Sir, with respect, doesn't that violate the chain of command? I leaned forward. Colonel, sometimes you have to break the rules to save the country. Those words would later be called treasonous by some, but everyone in that room understood the gravity of what we were facing. The president was unstable, and he had his finger on the nuclear trigger. But Trump wasn't done. Oh no, he was just getting started. That afternoon, he called me back to the Oval Office. This time, he had company. Steve Bannon, his former chief strategist, and Michael Flynn, his pardoned national security advisor. Both men looked at me with the kind of predatory smiles that made my skin crawl. General, Trump said, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. About showing strength. Flynn leaned forward. The president has been exploring creative options for dealing with the China problem. Creative options? I asked. Bannon spoke up, his voice oily with satisfaction. Preemptive strikes. Hit them before they know what's coming. Send a message that resonates around the world. Trump nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Hit their military installations in the South China Sea. Maybe a few submarine bases. Show them we mean business. My mouth went dry. Mr. President, an attack on Chinese military installations would be an act of war. China would retaliate. We'd be looking at global conflict within hours. So what? Trump shrugged. We'd win. We've got the best military in the world, right, General? Flynn chimed in. Besides, they started it with the election interference. This is just ... finishing what they began. I looked around the room, at these three men, the President of the United States, his chief strategist, and a former general, and I realized I was looking at the face of madness. They were talking about starting World War III, like they were planning a campaign rally. Sir, I said slowly, I need to remind you that any military action of this magnitude requires congressional approval under the War Powers Act. Trump's face darkened. I don't need Congress. I don't need approval. I need results. Bannon leaned back in his chair. The president has been exploring the legal precedents. The War Powers Act has flexibility when it comes to imminent threats. What imminent threats? I demanded. Flynn smiled. The ones we're about to create. That night, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I picked up my secure phone and dialed a number I'd hoped never to use. General Li Zuosheng, please. This is General Milley. Li Zuosheng was my counterpart in China, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the People's Liberation Army. We'd met several times at international conferences, maintained a professional relationship despite our country's differences. General Milley, Li's voice came through the translator, cautious but curious. This is ... unexpected. General Li, what I'm about to tell you is not official communication, but it's vital that you understand the current situation. There was a pause. I'm listening. There are elements within the American government that are unstable. If you receive any provocative communications or detect unusual military movements in the coming days, I need you to contact me directly before taking any action. Another pause, longer this time. General Milley, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that cooler heads need to prevail on both sides. Are you speaking for your government? I'm speaking for sanity. That conversation could have been considered treason. Probably was treason, technically speaking. But as I hung up the phone, I knew I'd potentially prevented nuclear war. I wish I could say That was the end of it. But Trump was far from finished. The next morning, January 8th, I received a call that made my blood freeze. It was General Keith Alexander, former NSA director, and a man I trusted implicitly. "Mark," he said, his voice tight with urgency, "we've intercepted some communications that you need to know about. The president has been making calls." "What kind of calls?" "Unofficial channels. People with connections to certain military contractors. People who owe him favors." My stomach dropped. "Are you telling me he's trying to go around the Pentagon?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. Word is, he's exploring private military options, mercenary groups, deniable assets." The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. If Trump couldn't get the official military to attack China, he was apparently prepared to hire someone who would. "How credible is this intelligence?" I asked. "Credible enough that I'm breaking about 15 security protocols to warn you." I hung up and immediately called Secretary Miller. "Chris, we need to talk now." 20 minutes later, Miller was in my office, his face pale with exhaustion. The poor man had been defense secretary for all of 2 months, and now he was dealing with a potential constitutional crisis. "Mark," he said, slumping into a chair, "I think the president is losing it. Yesterday he asked me about using cyber weapons against Chinese infrastructure. When I explained the escalation risks, he started screaming about how everyone in his administration was weak. It gets worse." I told him about Alexander's call. Miller's face went ashen. "Jesus Christ, he's really doing this, isn't he? He's really going to try to start a war." "Not if I can help it," I said. But even as I said the words, I wondered if I was already too late. That afternoon brought confirmation of my worst fears. My aide knocked on my door with a message that made my hands shake. "Sir, the president wants to see you in the Situation Room immediately." I walked down those familiar Pentagon corridors feeling like I was walking to my own execution. When I entered the Situation Room, I found Trump surrounded by people I didn't recognize, men in expensive suits with faces like granite. "General Milley," Trump said, his voice unnaturally calm, "I'd like you to meet some friends of mine, businessmen with international experience." One of the men stepped forward. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. "General," he said in an accent I couldn't quite place, "the president has been explaining the China situation to us. We believe we can help." "Help how?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Another man spoke up, younger, with dead eyes that had seen too much violence. "We have assets in the region, ships, aircraft, personnel, all completely deniable, of course." Trump leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "They can hit Chinese positions and make it look like an accident, or maybe like the Chinese attacked themselves. Create the justification we need for a real response." "A false flag operation," I said quietly. "A creative solution," the silver-haired man corrected. I looked around the room at these faces, the President of the United States, and what appeared to be a collection of international mercenaries and war profiteers. This wasn't just madness. It was treason of the highest order. "Mr. President," I said, choosing my words very carefully, "I cannot and will not authorize any such operation." Trump's mask slipped. "You'll do what I tell you to do, General." "No, sir, I won't." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, one of the mercenaries spoke up. "Perhaps the general needs time to consider the national security implications of non-compliance." Was that a threat? It sure sounded like one. I stood up. "Gentlemen, this meeting is over." As I walked toward the door, Trump called after me, "You're making a big mistake, Milley, a big mistake." I didn't look back. But Trump wasn't finished with me. Not by a long shot. That evening, I was at home with my wife Hollyann when my secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. What I read made my blood turn to ice. General, your family's safety depends on your cooperation. Reconsider your position. You have 24 hours. My wife noticed my face had gone white. Mark, what is it? I couldn't tell her. How could I explain that the President of the United States was apparently threatening my family? How could I make her understand that we were living through something that shouldn't be possible in America? Just work stuff, honey, I lied. I need to make some calls. I went to my study and activated every security protocol I knew. Then I called the one person I trusted most in the intelligence community, CIA Director Gina Haspel. Gina, I said. When she answered, I need a favor, a big one. What kind of favor? The kind that might save the Republic. There was a long pause. Then, I'm listening, I told her about the threat, about the mercenaries, about everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Mark, she finally said, this is bigger than we thought. We've been tracking some unusual financial movements. Large payments to private military contractors. Shell companies with ties to Russian oligarchs. Foreign bank accounts being activated. What are you saying? I'm saying this isn't just about China anymore. Trump's got backing, international backing. People who want to see America destabilized. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. This wasn't just an unstable president having a breakdown. This was a coordinated effort to drag America into a war that would destroy our global standing and potentially tear the country apart. Gina, I said, what do? We fight back. The next morning, January 9th, I implemented what I later called the Praetorian Protocol. I called every key military commander in the Pacific, every admiral with nuclear submarines, every general with authority over strategic weapons. The message was simple. Any order that comes from the White House regarding military action against China is to be verified through me personally, before execution. Any order, no exceptions. It was the closest thing to a military coup in American history. But I wasn't seizing power. I was preventing its abuse. Trump found out within hours. You son of a bitch. He screamed over the phone. You think you can defy me? You think you can commit treason and get away with it? Mr. President, I said calmly, I'm protecting the Constitution. You're protecting yourself. But it won't work. I've got insurance, Milley. I've got people who'll make sure you pay for this. The line went dead. 2 hours later, my worst fears were confirmed. Secretary Miller called me, his voice shaking with rage and fear. Mark, you need to know, ... Trump just fired me. His replacement is someone I've never heard of. And he's bringing in his own people to run defense. Who? I don't know their names. But I know their type. Private contractors. Mercenaries. People who'll do anything for money. This was it. Trump was installing his own military leadership. People who would follow his orders without question. People who would launch nuclear weapons if he asked them to. But here's what Trump didn't understand about the American military. Loyalty runs deeper than rank. When word got out about what was happening, something unprecedented occurred. Officers started resigning. Not just one or two, but dozens. Generals, admirals, colonels, career military personnel who'd dedicated their lives to serving their country were walking away, rather than serve under Trump's shadow government. But more importantly, those who stayed began to organize. Admiral Charles Richard, commander of Strategic Command, called me personally. Mark, he said, whatever you need, you've got it. Nobody's launching nukes on my watch, unless there's a real threat. General James McConville, Army Chief of Staff, sent me an encrypted message. The Army stands with you. Similar messages came from the Air Force, Navy, Marines, and Space Force. For the first time in American history, the military was quietly but firmly refusing to follow their commander-in-chief. It should have been terrifying. In any other country, it would have been a coup. But in America, it was something else. It was the military choosing the Constitution over one man. On January 10th, just 10 days before Biden's inauguration, Trump made his final, desperate move. At 3:47 a.m., he attempted to use the emergency presidential communications system to order a nuclear strike on Chinese naval facilities in the South China Sea. The order went out to Strategic Command, 2 submarine commanders in the Pacific, 2 bomber crews on standby. None of them responded, because every single person in the nuclear chain of command had been briefed on the Praetorian Protocol. They were waiting for my confirmation, and I wasn't giving it. Trump called me directly, screaming obscenities, threatening court-martial, threatening execution for treason. "You're finished, Milley," he raged. "You're all finished. I'll have you all shot for treason." "Mr. President," I said quietly, "your presidency ends in 10 days. This madness ends today, at 6:23 a.m. I did something no chairman of the Joint Chiefs had ever done in American history. I called a press conference and told the American people the truth. Standing at the Pentagon podium, facing a room full of reporters and cameras broadcasting to the world, I laid out everything. The nuclear threats, the mercenaries, the attempted strike order, all of it. The American people deserve to know, I said, that their military will never be used to satisfy one man's personal vendettas or unstable impulses. We swore an oath to the Constitution, not to any individual, and we will honor that oath. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Congress demanded Trump's immediate removal. Foreign allies praised the military's restraint. Even some Republicans began distancing themselves from Trump, but Trump's supporters called for my head, literally. Death threats poured in. Protesters gathered outside the Pentagon and my family home. Armed groups talked openly about dealing with the traitor, Milley. For 72 hours, America teetered on the edge of something unprecedented. Not a foreign war, but a domestic crisis that could have torn the country apart. Then on January 13th, something unexpected happened. Trump went silent. No more calls, no more threats, no more desperate attempts to assert control. His social media accounts were suspended. His remaining staff began resigning. And suddenly, the man who had seemed so dangerous just stopped. Later, I learned why. The combination of military defiance, congressional pressure, and threats of immediate impeachment had finally broken through his delusions. Even Trump understood that his presidency was over, but the damage was done. For 2 weeks, the American military had been in quiet rebellion against its civilian leadership. For 2 weeks, we had walked a tightrope between saving democracy and destroying it. Biden was inaugurated on January 20th without incident. Trump left Washington that morning, and the crisis that had nearly destroyed America quietly ended. But it left scars that may never heal. In the months that followed, investigations revealed the full scope of what had almost happened. Congressional hearings exposed the mercenary connections, the foreign financing, the elaborate plan to drag America into an unwinnable war. Some called me a hero, others called me a traitor. History will judge which is correct. All I know is this. In those dark days of January 2021, I was faced with an impossible choice: follow orders and potentially start World War III, or break my oath and save my country. I chose my country. One chose the Constitution. I chose sanity over madness, and I'd do it again tomorrow. Because sometimes, the most patriotic thing you can do is say no to your president. Sometimes, saving democracy means breaking the rules, and sometimes, the greatest act of loyalty is an act of defiance. This is my story. This is what really happened. And this is why I pray we never face such a choice again. Because next time, we might not be so lucky. The American Republic survived January 2021, but just barely, and the man who almost destroyed it with the push of a button was just 10 days away from losing the power to do it. 10 days that felt like a lifetime. 10 days that changed everything. 10 days that proved democracy is more fragile than we ever imagined.